And the fact that everybody thinks that they're right is surely an indication that there's something wrong with the very idea.
What we're thinking about, or the model we're using in the theory, is very much going to influence how we perceive that reality. But the reality still exists.
My guess is if you were to ask QAnon, people who subscribe to QAnon, they should exhibit none of the habits of mind that you would associate with a relativist.
Good evening and welcome to our debate on nothing but the truth. We have become increasingly aware of the importance of culture, language, history, and identity in determining our beliefs and opinions. Yet most remain convinced that their own views and opinions, mine for example, are not just culturally relative, but are the true and accurate accounts of the way things are. Should we conclude that all forms of relativism are a mistake, and insist on the importance and need to identify the true version of events and the correctness of our own outlook? Alternatively, are some beliefs, such as morality and politics, contextual, while science remains objective? Or are all views essentially perspectival, in which case, do we have to give up on the very possibility that we can be ultimately right about anything? We've got three brilliant speakers here to illuminate the nature of truth as the evening gathers. And these are first Michael Shermer, who is a science writer, founder of the Skeptic Society, editor-in-chief of the magazine Skeptic, and a presidential fellow at Chapman University, where he teaches Skepticism 101. He's published 20 books, including his newest, Giving the Devil His Due, Reflections of a Scientific Humanist, published last year. Hilary Lawson is a postmodern philosopher and renowned critic of philosophical realism, who's best known for his theory of closure, which puts forward a non-realist metaphysics, arguing that we close the openness of the world with our thought and our language. And finally, Jennifer Ratner-Rosenhagen is professor of history at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and is known for her work on Nietzsche and the transatlantic flow of intellectual movements. Her books include American Nietzsche and The Ideas That Made America, which was published in 2019. So first, we're going to start with Michael. And Michael, I am going to ask you the concise yet tricky question. Are all forms of relativism a mistake? And you'll have 3 minutes. Are all forms of relativism a mistake? Go for it.
Yes, in general, I would say so, because the word has become so loaded with the idea of subjective truths and lived realities as valid as objective truths or external truths that can be verified by other people. So let me just spend my time distinguishing between those kinds of truths. If we ask, what is truth anyway? Well, depends what you're talking about. If I say, I think dark chocolate is better than milk chocolate, and you say, no, I think milk chocolate's better than dark chocolate. Well, there's no experiment we're going to run and determine who has the right answer. These are just internal subjective preferences or subjective feelings or emotions we have about a particular, in this case, food product. Or if I say, I think the greatest rock song of all time is Stairway to Heaven, which I happen to think is the greatest rock song of all time, but maybe you disagree with me and you say, no, it's whatever, Freebird or something like this. There's no experiment we're going to run to determine the truth. These are internal truths. And from there, we can kind of build out to like, well, if I say I'm in favor of a progressive tax, and you say, well, I'm in favor of a flat tax, and somebody else says I'm in favor of a regressive tax. Again, that's not the kind of objective empirical truth that science can determine. That's what democracy is about, elections are about, and the party in power is going to be the one that imposes that particular tax preference, something like that. But on the other hand, if I say, well, the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old, and the young Earth creationist says, no, I think it's about 10,000 years old. The truth is not determined by, adding them up and dividing by 2, or, your lived experience of a 10,000-year-old Earth is equivalent to mine based on geological evidence that it's 4.6 billion years. One of those is just wrong. and it's the young Earth creationists. They're just wrong about this. And it's not like the fact that geologists don't agree exactly, 4.56, 4.57, there's error bars, but they agree largely within that. So here I define truth as a claim for which the evidence is so substantial, it would be unreasonable to withhold our provisional assent. So provisional is the key. It's a small t. There are no proofs in science like in mathematics, or capital T truths like in religion. We always have to keep an open mind. But on the other hand, we don't have to keep running experiments about apples falling down because it's provisionally true that gravity exists. Now, how do you go from subjective truths to objective truths? Well, if I say, for example, meditation works for me, it makes me feel better, my headache goes away, my stress levels go down, and so on. That's a subjective truth. But people that meditate, many of my friends, for example, claim, no, it's more than that we can prove experimentally, empirically, by measuring blood pressure and stress hormones and heart rate and subjective reports of anxiety or depression or any of these measures, such that if we could recommend, say, 1 hour of meditation every day, 6 days a week, will cause the following percentage of people to have these improved health measures, something like that. That would be a move from a subjective truth to an objective truth. And in science, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get at something that it's not just internal to me. You can see it, you can measure it, I can measure it, this other lab over there can test it, and we can have open disputation and debate about it, because sometimes it gets kind of messy, and particularly in the social sciences, about what's true. But that's why we have to have open dialogue.
Fantastic, great, and we'll hear more about that in a moment. Hilary, I will turn to you. Will you let us know, please, from your perspective, are all forms of relativism a mistake?
Well, thank you. Well, some forms of relativism are a mistake, but I want to argue that an awareness of the importance of perspective is a primary lesson for us of the last 100 years. Now, belief in objective truth is very beguiling. It gives us the sense of progress, knowing where we are, but I would argue that over the last century, we have uncovered that it's an illusion. And in the current climate, a dangerous illusion at that. Now, Stephen Hawking, towards the end of A Brief History in Time, his account of the contemporary scientific story of the universe, puts forward the idea that maybe just round the corner there's a grand unified theory which would account for everything. And in it, he uses, in his words, as this might enable us to see into the mind of God. And of course, it's a rhetorical move on his part. He didn't believe in God. But what he's trying to say is to express, as it were, the fantasy of objective truth, that we can arrive, we get there, and we know how things are. Now, towards the end of his life, he moved away from that in favor of a model theoretic account, in which different physics accounts of the world are seen as models, and we try and improve those models and we try and get them to be better, but there isn't a correct one, or at least we can't assume that there would be a correct one. And in holding that view, he was in good company. I mean, Heisenberg took a similar sort of view when he founded quantum mechanics and most of contemporary science with it back in the 20s. And Hawking, in taking this outlook, is really, I would argue, at the end of an arc in the 20th century in which there's gradually seen to be an uncovery of evidence for the importance of perspective. And, it started with maybe Frose's Golden Bough and listing belief systems across the world, and that becoming apparent that there couldn't really be one that was true, to it invading our thoughts about morality, and fundamentally the idea that language changes the way that we understand the world, so that now we see ourselves as, when we have an outlook, as that outlook is a function of history, culture, our language, and of course a function of the fact that we're human. We think in a human ways. A bat would not think as we do. So the idea that this perspective, which has all of these constraints, can somehow reach through and find out how reality is absolutely, it seems to me to be implausible. Now, it doesn't mean, when we conclude that therefore anything goes, that we can adopt a sort of, well, I can just come up with any old theory and propound that as being true. Because we have to get our accounts of the world to work for us. And we can test those theories, not by somehow uncovering nuggets of facts, but we test them by seeing whether if we operate according to that, they work or not. And this final thought I'd like to make, which is one which I think is frequently misunderstood, which is that being aware of the importance of perspective and there being different perspectives on the world and there not being an ultimate one, doesn't mean we can't argue for and challenge fundamentally those views that we think are misguided or indeed abhorrent. All it means is we can't simply respond to them by saying, I'm right and you're wrong. Instead, we have to use those rather unfashionable strategies of the Enlightenment, empiricism and rationalism, to point to what it is about our perspective that has things going for it and why it is valuable. And in that way, I think we've got the potential to be in a better space in future where we respect each other's perspectives, but at the same time are tied to looking very closely at whether they work or not.
Great. Thank you so much, Hilary. And finally, Jennifer, would you please let us know whether all forms of relativism are a mistake?
Let me start by saying that I assume that I was invited to participate in this conversation because I'm a historian, not a philosopher, though I'm a historian who focuses on the history of philosophy. And by that historical view has shown me how relativism is a pretty baggy word.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.